Now, before we get to Eleanor, let me tell you about the man who inherited everything. His name was William Cavendish, the Duke of Ashford. 34 years old, one of the wealthiest men in England, and on the morning of October the 9th, he arrived at Whitmore Hall with exactly one thing on his mind: how quickly he could leave. He had 3 days. That was the plan. 3 days to walk through the estate, hand the inventory to his solicitors, arrange the sale, and get back to London by Thursday evening, because on Saturday he was having dinner with Lord Hargrove, his future father-in-law. And that dinner was important, very important. See, William wasn't marrying Cecilia Hargrove for love. He knew that. Cecilia probably knew that too, but Cecilia's father controlled the largest textile operation in the north of England, and William had just acquired 3 wool mills in Yorkshire, and when you put those 2 things together, well, the numbers were very beautiful. William liked beautiful numbers. So, the estate. 3 days, in and out. His carriage stopped in front of Whitmore Hall at 9:30 in the morning. His solicitor, Mr. Doyle, was already waiting outside, looking nervous in the way solicitors always looked around William. William stepped out. He looked at the house. Big, old, the kind of house that had been impressive once, maybe 30 years ago. Now the grounds were overgrown, the fountain in the front courtyard had gone dry, and the ivy on the east wing looked like it had been making decisions on its own for quite some time. He made a note in his head, lower the auction estimate, let the buyer account for repairs, and walked toward the steps. "Your Brace," Doyle rushed forward. "Good morning. I have the inventory prepared and also the property survey you requested, and good." William didn't slow down. "I want to walk the house this morning, meet with the auction house tomorrow, and have the paperwork finalized by Wednesday. Is there anything I need to know before we start?" Doyle hesitated. Just for a moment, just long enough. William stopped, turned around. "Doyle." "There is one clause in the will," Doyle said carefully, "that I perhaps should have flagged earlier." He held out the document. William took it, found the page, read it. Then he read it again. "My daughter, Eleanor Ann Whitmore, to be placed entirely at the discretion of the Duke of Ashford, in full settlement of debts herein listed." He looked up at Doyle. "He put her after the horses?" Doyle cleared his throat. "Technically, yes." William handed the papers back. He stood there for a moment, in front of this old, quiet house, with the dry fountain and the overgrown garden and the portraits of dead men visible through the front window. Then he said, "Where is she now?" "That," Doyle said, "is the other thing I needed to mention." He paused. "She's still here, Your Grace." Now, you might be wondering, why was she still there? The answer is simple, really. Where else was she supposed to go? Eleanor Whitmore was 23 years old. Her mother had died when she was 11. Her father, the late Lord Whitmore, had been a man who was very good at 2 things: spending money and pretending he wasn't spending money. By the time he died, the debts had swallowed everything: the estate, the investments, the accounts, all of it gone. And Eleanor knew this. She had known it for a while, actually. You can always tell when a house is slowly emptying. The staff gets smaller. Certain rooms get closed off. Your father stops mentioning the future. So she had stayed. She had packed one small trunk, placed it near the door of her bedroom, and waited. She just hadn't expected, well, the last clause. William found out the full details that afternoon. He sat in the estate's study, a dark room, heavy furniture, the kind of room that smelled like old paper and decisions. and Doyle walked him through the will, line by line. Lord Whitmore had owed William's family a significant sum, old debt, going back years, tied to a land investment that had gone badly. When Whitmore died, there was nothing left to settle it with, nothing except the estate itself, and his daughter. To be placed at the Duke's discretion, William repeated, slowly. Yes. What does that mean exactly, legally? Doyle folded his hands on the table. It means Lord Whitmore gave you the authority to determine her situation, her living arrangements, her future, in a sense. William looked at him. He gave me his daughter like a piece of furniture. Doyle said nothing, which was, really, its own kind of answer. William leaned back in his chair. Outside the window, the grounds sat gray and still under the October sky. A gardener, one of the last remaining staff, it seemed, was raking leaves near the east wall, moving slowly like a man with nowhere particular to be. This was not a complication William had planned for.
He thought about Cecilia, about Saturday's dinner, about the Yorkshire mills and the numbers that were so close to being beautiful. He didn't need this. "I'll arrange a small income for her," he said finally, "something reasonable, and I'll write to her father's cousin in Bath. Doyle, find out if there's a cousin, some family somewhere. She can go there." Doyle nodded carefully. "And in the meantime?" "In the meantime, she stays here until I've finished with the estate." William stood up, straightening his coat. "I'll speak to her briefly, explain the situation. It doesn't need to be complicated." Doyle nodded again. William picked up his papers and walked toward the door. And then Doyle said quietly, "Your Grace, she's in the library. Has been all morning, I believe." William paused. "Reading?" "Yes." He didn't know why that stopped him. It was a perfectly ordinary thing to do. People read books every day. But for some reason, the image of her sitting in that library, in a house that was no longer hers, on a morning when a stranger had arrived to take everything, just reading. He pushed the thought aside. "Thank you, Doyle," he said, and walked out.
The library was at the end of the east corridor. William walked there alone. He hadn't asked Doyle to come. This was a simple conversation. 2 minutes at most. He would introduce himself, explain the arrangements, and that would be that. He pushed open the door. The room was large, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves on 3 walls, a fireplace on the 4th, 2 tall windows letting in what gray light the October sky had to offer. It smelled like old books and wood smoke. Someone had lit the fire that morning, small, modest, just enough to keep the chill out. And there, in the armchair nearest the window, was Eleanor Whitmore. She was reading, or she had been reading. The book was still open in her lap, but she had looked up the moment the door opened. She was watching him with calm, steady eyes. She didn't look like a woman who had just lost everything. That was the first thing William noticed. No red eyes, no wringing of hands. She was sitting straight in that armchair, in a simple gray dress, her dark hair pinned back without fuss, and she was looking at him the way you look at someone you have been expecting for a while. She closed the book, set it on the side table. Then she stood. "Your Grace," she said. Her voice was quiet, composed. The kind of composed that isn't natural, the kind you learn over years because you have had to. "Miss Whitmore," William nodded. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you," she said, and that was it. No performance, no tears, just, "Thank you." William clasped his hands behind his back. He had given difficult news before, many times, to tenants, to business partners, to people who owed him money. He knew how to do this cleanly, without cruelty, without unnecessary sentiment. "I've been reviewing your father's will with Mr. Doyle this afternoon," he said. "I want to be straightforward with you. I think that's kinder than being vague." "I would prefer that," she said. "Yes. The estate will be sold. I expect to have everything finalized within the week." He paused. "As for your own situation, I'm arranging an income for you, something that will allow you to live comfortably while more permanent arrangements are made. I'm also making inquiries about your father's family, whether there are relatives who might." "There aren't," Eleanor said, simply, without bitterness. "My father had a cousin in Bath. He died 2 years ago. There's no one else." William looked at her. She looked back. "I see," he said. A small silence settled in the room. The fire made a quiet sound. Outside, a bird passed the window. William had planned to wrap this up in 2 minutes. He checked himself, he was now standing in this library, and the 2 minutes had somehow become something else. "You knew," he said, "about the will." "Not the specific details," Eleanor said, "but I knew the estate was gone. I've known for about a year. And yet you stayed." "I had nowhere to go." She said it without self-pity, just a fact, the way you'd say it rained yesterday. "And I thought perhaps whoever came would at least tell me directly what was going to happen." She glanced briefly around the room, at the bookshelves, the fireplace, the windows. "This was my mother's favorite room," she said. I just wanted a little more time in it before." She stopped herself, looked back at him. "I won't make this difficult for you, Your Grace. I understand the situation perfectly." William said nothing for a moment. He was a man who was very good at reading rooms, at understanding what people wanted, what they were hiding, what they were performing. It was something he had learned young and sharpened over years. And Eleanor Whitmore was not performing anything. That was unusual. "Take the week," he said. "I'll need the house through Thursday for the inventory. After that, we'll speak again before anything is finalized." Something passed across her face. Not gratitude exactly. Something quieter than that. "Thank you," she said again. William nodded once, turned to leave. He was almost at the door when he stopped. He didn't know why, and looked back. She had sat back down in the armchair, picked up her book. She wasn't reading it. Her eyes were on the window, on the gray October sky outside, but her hands were holding the book, and her back was straight, and she looked exactly like someone who had been holding themselves together for a very long time, and intended to keep doing so. William turned back to the door and walked out. He told himself, walking down the east corridor, that it was efficiency. She needed time to vacate properly. It was the practical thing. He almost believed it. William had dinner alone that night. He had brought work with him, correspondence, documents, 2 letters from his London solicitor that needed responses. He spread them across the dining room table and worked through them methodically while the housekeeper, an older woman named Mrs. Hale, one of 3 remaining staff, brought soup, then bread, then a plate of cold meat that he ate without tasting. This was normal for William. He often worked through dinner. It was efficient. He finished the correspondence, folded everything neatly, set it aside. Then he sat there for a moment in the quiet of the Whitmore dining room, in a house that wasn't his yet, but would be by Thursday, and he poured himself a glass of port and picked up the will. He wasn't sure why. He had already read it. He knew what it said. There was nothing new in it. But he opened it anyway, and he read it again, slowly this time, not looking for legal details, not calculating, just reading. Lord Whitmore had been thorough, he'd give him that.
Every asset listed precisely, the house and grounds, the furniture room by room, the paintings with their estimated values, the silver, the horses, 3 of them, named individually with notes on their temperament and worth. Then at the very bottom of the last page, my daughter, Eleanor Ann Whitmore, to be placed entirely at the discretion of the Duke of Ashford in full settlement of debts herein listed. William read it once, then again. Then he set the document on the table and looked at it. He had seen a great many wills in his life, his own father's, which had been 50 pages long and viciously specific. Clients' wills, business partners' wills, wills that were generous and wills that were cruel, and wills that were simply exhausted. The last act of a man who had run out of everything, including imagination. But this was something else. The horses had names, temperament notes, individual entries. Eleanor had one sentence: to be placed at the Duke's discretion. Not, my beloved daughter for whom I wish a good life. Not, my daughter who I trust will be treated with kindness. Not even the cold formality of a proper legal bequest. Just placed, like a chair, like an inconvenience to be dealt with. William closed the will. He drank his port. He thought about Eleanor in that library, sitting straight in that armchair, holding her book, looking at the gray sky. I won't make this difficult for you, Your Grace. I understand the situation perfectly. How long had she understood it? How long had she known, really known, what her father thought of her? He poured another glass.
This was not his problem, he reminded himself. He had a plan. The plan was working. By Thursday, the estate would be catalogued. By Friday, he would be in London. By Saturday, he would be at the Hargrove dinner, and the numbers would be beautiful, and everything would proceed exactly as designed. He had arranged an income for the girl. That was more than her own father had done. He was being generous, really. He picked up the will again, found the page, read the last clause one more time. To be placed at the Duke's discretion. He thought about his mother. He didn't mean to. It wasn't a memory he kept close. He had put it somewhere at the back of things years ago, and he preferred it stayed there. But it came anyway, the way those things do, quietly and without asking permission. His mother at the breakfast table. His father speaking to her about some financial matter, the tone more than the words, that particular tone his father used with her, patient and dismissive all at once, the tone you use with someone whose opinion you have already decided doesn't matter. His mother's hands folded in her lap, her back perfectly straight. Not arguing, not crying, just still, the way Eleanor had been still. William set down the glass. He sat for a long moment in the quiet dining room. Then he folded the will, put it back in the document case, and went to bed. He told himself he would sleep easily. He didn't. He started early. 7:30 in the morning, William was already in the entrance hall with a leather notebook and a pencil, going room by room. This was the kind of work he actually liked, methodical, clear, a beginning and an end. You walk in, you write down what's there, you walk out. No ambiguity. Mrs. Hale had offered to help. He had said yes, thank you, and she had lasted about 40 minutes before her knees gave her trouble with the stairs, and he sent her back to the kitchen with genuine politeness, which left him alone. He was in the drawing room, cataloging a set of 6 chairs that would do well at auction, decent condition, good fabric, when Eleanor appeared in the doorway. She was dressed simply again, dark blue today, hair pinned back the same way. She had a cup of tea in one hand, and she stopped when she saw him, as if she hadn't been entirely sure he'd be there already. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning." A brief pause. "May I help?" she asked. "I know the house, every piece in it, where it came from, what it's worth, what condition it's really in." She said it plainly, no particular feeling attached. "It might save you time." William looked at her for a moment. She wasn't offering out of sentiment. She wasn't trying to slow the process down or make it painful or use it as an opportunity to change his mind. She was just offering something useful. "All right," he said, "start with this room." And so they worked.
Eleanor was, William discovered within the first hour, extraordinarily useful. She moved through the house the way someone moves through a place they know in the dark, certain, unhurried, precise. She could tell him the age of a piece of furniture by the joinery. She knew which paintings had been in the family for generations and which her father had bought recently to impress guests. She knew the silver was good, but the china was not, despite looking expensive. She was also, and this was the part William hadn't expected, completely honest. "That clock," she said, nodding toward the mantelpiece in the morning room, "my father always said it was French, 18th century. And it's English, 40 years old at most. He bought it from a man in Cheapside and told everyone it was an heirloom." She paused. "You'll want to have it properly assessed before the auction house puts a value on it. Don't let them take his word for it." William wrote it down. His word, not my father's word. He noticed that. She said his throughout the morning, not father, not papa, just his, the way you'd refer to a landlord, a stranger.
They worked through the morning room, the dining room, the small parlor on the ground floor. They went upstairs, the guest bedrooms, the linen rooms, the study. Eleanor walked ahead of him in each room, opening wardrobes and cupboards without being asked, telling him what was inside, what it was worth, what condition it was actually in versus what condition it appeared to be in. At one point, she opened a cupboard in the upstairs corridor and stood back. "Silver candlesticks," she said. 12 of them. My mother's. They were listed as lost in the inventory my father gave his solicitor 3 years ago." She looked at them for a second. They weren't lost. William looked at the candlesticks, then at her. Her expression hadn't changed. She wasn't asking him for anything. She wasn't making a case. He wrote them down. They stopped at noon. Mrs. Hale had left sandwiches in the dining room, and they sat, not quite together, not quite apart, at one end of the long table and ate them. Outside the windows, the October sky had gone from gray to a flat, pale white. It was going to rain by evening. William had worked alongside a great many people, business partners, solicitors, estate managers. He was used to a certain kind of professional silence, the silence of people who are performing competence at each other. This was different. Eleanor ate her sandwich and looked out the window and didn't feel the need to fill the quiet with anything. And somehow that made the quiet easy. He couldn't think of another word for it, just easy. "The library," he said after a while. "We haven't done the library yet." Eleanor looked at her sandwich for a moment. "No," she said, "we haven't. We can leave it until tomorrow if you'd prefer." She looked up at him then, a quick, searching look, trying to work out whether he meant it kindly or whether he was simply being efficient. "Tomorrow is fine," she said. "Thank you." William nodded, looked back at his notes. Outside, the first drops of rain began to hit the window. He had planned to write to Hargrove's secretary that afternoon, confirm Saturday's dinner, confirm his return to London by Friday. He didn't write the letter. He told himself he'd do it in the morning. It rained all evening. William sat in the study after dinner, Lord Whitmore's study, dark wood and heavy curtains, the kind of room that felt like it had absorbed decades of bad decisions, and he tried to work. He had letters to write, numbers to review, a note to Hargrove's secretary that he had been putting off since morning for no good reason. He wrote 2 sentences of the Hargrove letter, stopped, read them back, put the pen down. He sat there listening to the rain hit the windows, and he thought about Eleanor saying his word all morning. Not bitterly, not pointedly, just accurately. The way you describe something that stopped hurting a long time ago because you ran out of ways to feel it. He pulled the will toward him. He had told himself he wasn't going to read it again. He had read it twice already. He knew what it said. He read it again. This time he read the whole thing, from the beginning, slowly. And the thing was, it was a careful document. Lord Whitmore had been specific, thorough. The man had clearly sat down with his solicitor and gone through every single asset and thought about each one. The house, yes. The grounds, yes. The furniture listed by room, every painting, the library, books to be sold as a collection, estimated value appended. The silver, see attached inventory, items verified by assay. The horses, and here William slowed down because he wanted to read this part carefully.
Samson, bay stallion, 7 years, sound in wind and limb. Excellent temperament, suitable for a gentleman rider. Estimated value? He read all 3 horses, full entries, temperament, condition, suitability, value. Then he turned the page. My daughter, Eleanor Ann Whitmore, to be placed entirely at the discretion of the Duke of Ashford, in full settlement of debts herein listed. 1 sentence. No, he counted the words. 17 words. The horses had gotten more. William sat back in the chair. He thought about the candlesticks in the corridor cupboard, listed as lost. Not lost, just put away somewhere she couldn't have them. Her mother's candlesticks, and she had stood there and told him about them without any drama, without asking for anything, because she understood that they weren't hers to ask for. He thought about the back of her neck when she was writing something down in the morning room, bent over the small desk, the rain starting outside, the way she held herself, always straight, always composed. His mother used to sit like that.
And there it was again, that memory he kept at the back of things, coming forward without permission the way it had last night. His mother at the dining table, his father talking about the estate accounts, about some decision he'd already made, telling her the way you tell someone the weather, not asking, not discussing, simply informing. Because her opinion was not part of the calculation, had never been part of the calculation. His mother's hands in her lap, that careful stillness. William had been, 9, 10? He had sat across the table and watched and not understood it fully, not then. Children don't have the words for those things when they're young. They just feel them. A wrongness, a silence that is too heavy. A room where one person takes up all the air and another person makes themselves smaller and smaller to accommodate it. He had understood it later, much later. And then he had grown up and become his father. Not in the same way. He had never been cruel, never been cold, never spoken to anyone the way his father spoke to his mother. He had told himself that meant he was different. But he thought about Charlotte Hargrove, about their engagement which had been arranged over a dinner between himself and her father, a dinner Charlotte had not attended. He had met her 4 times. She was pleasant, pretty, agreeable. Had anyone asked her what she wanted? Had he asked her? He picked up his pen, put it down again. The rain was heavier now. It hit the study window in waves, running down the glass in long, crooked lines. He thought about Eleanor, saying, "I won't make this difficult for you, Your Grace." First words she had spoken to him, not "please help me," not "this is unfair," just "I won't be a problem. I understand. I'll make myself easy to deal with."
because she had learned, somewhere along the way, that making herself easy to deal with was the only currency she had. His mother had learned the same thing, and neither of them should have had to. William closed the will. He sat in the dark study for a long time, with the rain on the windows and the fire going low, and he didn't write the letter to Hargrove's secretary. He didn't write it that night. And somewhere, at the back of his mind, in a place he wasn't quite ready to look at yet, he was beginning to wonder if he was going to write it at all.
It was Eleanor who suggested it, actually. Not in an obvious way. She didn't say, "Would you like to have dinner together?" She simply appeared in the doorway of the study at 6:30, while William was still going through the upstairs inventory notes, and said that Mrs. Hale had made soup, and there was enough for two, and it seemed wasteful to heat the dining room twice. Practical, efficient, the kind of suggestion William himself would have made. He said yes. They sat at one end of the long dining table again, the same end as lunch, the rest of the table stretching away into the dim room like an afterthought. Mrs. Hale brought soup, then bread, then a roast that was simple but good. The rain was still going outside. The candles on the table moved slightly every time someone shifted in their seat. For the first few minutes they talked about the inventory, what was left to do tomorrow, the library. They had agreed on the library tomorrow morning, and William had a man coming from the auction house in the afternoon who would want to see the paintings. Practical things, safe things. And then there was a pause, and Eleanor said, without looking up from her soup, "Do you read much, Your Grace?" William looked at her. It was such a ordinary question, not "What are your intentions for the estate?" not "Have you given any more thought to my situation?" just "Do you read?" "Some," he said, "mostly correspondence at this point, history occasionally." "What period?" "Roman, mostly. Caesar, Suetonius." Eleanor looked up then. Something shifted slightly in her expression. Not surprise exactly, but interest. Real interest, not polite interest. "Not the emperors people usually choose," she said. "No? Most people start with Augustus, the success story." She picked up her bread. "Suetonius is more honest, less flattering." William looked at her. "You've read Suetonius." "I've read most of what's in that library," she said simply. "I had a great deal of time." He thought about that. A young woman alone in a house that was slowly emptying, with a father who had listed her below the horses, reading Roman history by herself in the library her mother had loved. "What else?" he said. She glanced at him, checking again whether the question was genuine. It was. "Thucydides," she said. "Gibbon. Some philosophy. Hume mostly, though I found him frustrating in places." She paused. "Marcus Aurelius. I've read that one several times." "The Meditations?" "Yes." William set down his spoon. "Why several times?" Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "Because he wrote it for himself," she said, "not for anyone else. He was the most powerful man in the world, and he sat down and wrote, 'You are not doing this well enough. Try again. Be better.' No audience, just honesty." She looked at the candle. "I found that useful." The dining room was very quiet. William thought about his father, about rooms full of people who agreed with everything he said, about Charlotte's father and the dinner where his engagement had been decided without Charlotte present, about himself sitting at his own long breakfast table every morning with the butler saying "Good morning, sir," and William saying "Good morning," and the newspaper arriving and the coffee arriving, and every morning exactly the same. He thought about Eleanor meeting Marcus Aurelius alone in a library, finding it useful. "I think," he said slowly, "I have spent a great deal of my life performing competence for rooms full of people who had already decided to be impressed by me." He wasn't sure why he said it. He hadn't planned to say it. It simply came out, the way things come out when a room is quiet enough and the person across from you isn't performing anything either. Eleanor looked at him. "Yes," she said, quietly, no surprise, no pity, just, "Yes, I believe that's true." And somehow that was the most startling response she could have given him. Not, "Oh, surely not," or "You're too modest," or any of the things people usually said. Just, "Yes." He picked up his wine. "That was rather direct," he said. "You said you preferred directness." "I did. I was taking you at your word."
He looked at her across the table. The candlelight, the rain on the windows, the long, empty dining room that had probably hosted 100 dinners full of people saying careful things to each other. "Fair enough," he said, and they kept talking. He wasn't sure, afterward, what all of it had been about. It moved the way good conversations move, from one thing to another without a clear map. Books, to history, to the estate, to a question Eleanor asked about Yorkshire that surprised him with its precision. He told her about the mills. She asked about the workers, not the numbers. How many families? What are the conditions? And he found himself answering honestly, including the parts that were not entirely flattering to him. She listened, really listened, not waiting for her turn to speak, not nodding automatically, actually listening. At some point, Mrs. Hale came to clear the plates and looked mildly startled to find them still at the table. William checked his watch. 9:30. He had sat down at 7. He looked up and found Eleanor looking at her own hands with the expression of someone who has also just noticed the time and is not entirely sure how that happened. "I should let you," she started. "Yes, I have—" "There are letters," he said at the same moment. A brief silence.
Then Eleanor stood, and William stood, and there was a moment, just a moment, of two people standing on either side of a table in a candlelit room, not quite knowing what to do with whatever the last 2.5 hours had been. "Good night, Your Grace," Eleanor said. "Good night, Miss Whitmore." She left. William stood at the table for another moment. Then he blew out 2 of the candles and walked to the study. He sat down, picked up his pen, looked at the blank paper in front of him, thought about, "You are not doing this well enough. Try again. Be better." Put the pen down. He did not write the letter to Hargrove's secretary that night either. He couldn't sleep. This was not, in itself, unusual. William had never been a particularly good sleeper. His mind didn't stop easily. It kept working, kept calculating, kept pulling at loose threads long after the rest of him wanted to be done for the day. But tonight was different. Tonight it wasn't numbers keeping him awake. He lay in the dark in the Whitmore guest bedroom. Large bed, good linen, the rain finally stopping outside, leaving that particular silence that rain leaves behind, and he stared at the ceiling, and he thought about Eleanor saying yes across the dinner table. Just yes, no softening, no performance. He thought about the candlesticks in the cupboard. He thought about 17 words, and then, without meaning to, he was somewhere else entirely.
He was 11 years old. Harwick House, the family estate in Derbyshire, a Tuesday evening in winter. He remembered it was winter because the windows had frosted at the edges, and he had drawn a small pattern in the corner of his bedroom window before coming downstairs. He had come down for a glass of water. The dining room door was ajar. His father was at the head of the table. His mother was sitting to his father's left, not across, not at the other end, but close, which should have meant warmth, but didn't. His father had a letter in his hand. He was reading something from it, explaining something about the Derbyshire property, about a decision he had made regarding the tenant farmers, a change in rents, William understood later, a significant one. His mother said something, quietly, just a few words,
a question or perhaps a concern. William couldn't hear it clearly through the gap in the door. His father looked up from the letter. He didn't raise his voice. His father rarely raised his voice. That wasn't his way. He simply looked at William's mother with that particular expression, patient, slightly tired, the expression of a man explaining something obvious to someone who should already understand it. He said something. William couldn't hear the words, but he didn't need to hear the words. He could see his mother's face. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She simply absorbed it. The way you absorb something when you have absorbed it many times before, and you have learned that the only thing to do is be still and wait for it to be over. Her hands were in her lap. Her back was straight. She was looking at his father with an expression that had no name, not quite sadness, not quite resignation, something older than both of those things, something that had been there so long it had become part of her face. William had stood at that door for a long moment. Then he had gone back upstairs without his glass of water. He was staring at the ceiling of the Whitmore guest bedroom. The memory wasn't new. He had always had it. It had always been there, one of those small moments from childhood that lodge somewhere and stay. But he had looked at it before without really looking at it, the way you look at something every day without seeing it. He was seeing it now. His mother's hands in her lap, Eleanor's hands in her lap, in the library when he had first walked in. His mother's back, straight and careful, in a chair at a table in her own house. Eleanor's back, straight and careful, in an armchair in a library in a house that was being taken from her. His mother saying something quiet, and his father looking up with that patient, dismissive expression. I have already decided your opinion is not part of this calculation. A dead man's will, to be placed at the Duke's discretion. 17 words, below the horses. William closed his eyes. His father had been a respected man, a powerful man. Nobody had ever said a word against him in public. He had run the estate well, managed the finances well, fulfilled every visible obligation a duke was supposed to fulfill. And he had made William's mother very small. Not loudly, not cruelly, not in the way that leaves marks people can see, just quietly, consistently, over years, in 100 small moments exactly like the one William had seen through a gap in a dining room door when he was 11 years old. And she had stayed straight, because what else could she do? What else could any of them do? William opened his eyes. He thought about the life he was building, the mills, the merger, Charlotte Hargrove, who was pleasant and pretty and had not been present at the dinner where her future was decided. Lord Hargrove, who had looked at the match the way he looked at acquisitions, asset, value, return. He thought about himself, 20 years from now, sitting at the head of a long table, a woman to his left with her hands in her lap and her back very straight. He sat up in the dark. For a long time he just sat there, on the edge of the bed, in the quiet that rain leaves behind. He wasn't ready to name what was happening to him, not yet. It was too new, too uncomfortable, too much like pulling at a thread in a coat you've worn for years and starting to feel the whole thing come loose. But something had shifted. Something he couldn't unshift. He reached over and lit the candle on the bedside table, sat there in the small circle of light, and for the first time in a very long time, maybe since he was 11 years old, standing at a gap in a door, watching something he didn't have words for yet, William Cavendish, the Duke of Ashford, felt something that was not a calculation. He didn't sleep until nearly 4 in the morning. He wrote it in the morning, early, before Eleanor was up, before Mrs. Hale had started in the kitchen, before the house had made any of its small waking sounds. William sat at the study desk in the gray pre-dawn light with a cup of cold coffee he had poured and forgotten about, and he wrote to Hargrove's secretary. It took him 4 attempts. The first version said too much. He read it back and crossed the whole thing out. The second version said too little, one line, almost rude in its brevity. He folded it, then unfolded it, then set it aside. The third version was fine, polished, professional. It said that due to unforeseen complications with the Whitmore estate documentation, he would require an additional few days before returning to London, and he hoped to confirm a revised date for Saturday's dinner by Wednesday at the latest. He read it 3 times.
Then he wrote a fourth version that was almost identical to the third, but used the word minor instead of unforeseen. Minor complications. He looked at that word, minor. He thought about the candlesticks in the cupboard, the 17 words, his mother's hands in her lap at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night in winter. Minor. He sealed the fourth version before he could write a fifth. Doyle arrived at 9. He came with 2 men from the auction house, a Mr. Fitch and a younger colleague whose name William didn't catch, and they spent the morning going through the downstairs rooms with the inventory list. William walked with them. Eleanor had disappeared somewhere upstairs. He had passed her on the landing, and she had said good morning, and he had said good morning, and neither of them had mentioned the dinner. Mr. Fitch was the kind of man who was very enthusiastic about other people's misfortune when it came in the form of sellable objects. He moved through the drawing room with barely concealed excitement, picking things up, turning them over, murmuring to his colleague. "Lovely piece," he kept saying. "Lovely piece. Yes, this will do very well." William watched him turn over one of Eleanor's mother's vases, the blue ones from the mantelpiece in the morning room, the ones Eleanor had told him yesterday had come from her grandmother's house in Somerset, and say, "Lovely piece," and set it back down with no more thought than if it were a cup at a market stall. William said nothing. He wrote down the auction house's estimates in his notebook. The numbers were good. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. In the afternoon, Doyle pulled him aside in the corridor. "Your Grace, regarding Miss Whitmore's arrangements," he had his careful solicitor expression on, "I've made some inquiries, as you asked. There is, as she said, no family to speak of. The Bath cousin is indeed deceased. There's a great-aunt in Edinburgh, but she's elderly, and the connection is distant." He paused. "In terms of the income you mentioned, I've drafted something modest, enough for a room somewhere respectable and basic living expenses. Perhaps a position as a companion or governess might also be—" "Hold off on that," William said. Doyle blinked. "Sir? The income arrangement. Hold off on drafting it for now." "For how long?" William looked at him. "A few days," he said. "I want to think about the numbers more carefully." Doyle wrote something in his notes. "Of course, Your Grace." William walked away down the corridor. He told himself it was about the numbers, the income amount. He wanted to be fair, more than fair, generous. He owed the girl that much given the circumstances. It needed more thought. That was all. That was completely all. He passed the library door. It was closed, but there was light under it, that thin line of warm light that meant the fire was lit and someone was inside. He kept walking. At the end of the corridor, he stopped, stood there for a moment, then he turned around, walked back, and knocked. "Come in," Eleanor said. He opened the door. She was at the desk this time, not the armchair. Writing something, a letter, it looked like. She looked up. "I'm sorry to interrupt," William said. "I wanted to let you know the auction house men have finished for today. You won't be disturbed again until tomorrow." Eleanor looked at him for a moment. "Thank you," she said. "The library is last," he said. "I thought we could leave it until Thursday, the final day." Something passed across her face, that same thing from before, not quite gratitude, something quieter. "That's very considerate," she said. He nodded once, looked briefly around the room, the bookshelves, the fire, the gray afternoon light in the windows, the armchair where he had first found her. "Good afternoon, Miss Whitmore," he said.
"Good afternoon, Your Grace." He pulled the door closed behind him. He stood in the corridor for a moment. He had told Doyle the income arrangement needed more thought. He had given Eleanor an extra day in the library. He had written to Hargrove's secretary about minor complications. He looked down at his notebook, the auction house estimates, the good numbers, the numbers that were almost beautiful. He closed the notebook, and for the first time, just for a moment, just at the edge of a thought he wasn't ready to finish yet, he wondered whether the numbers were going to stay beautiful much longer. It was Wednesday morning. William was coming down the main staircase with his notebook when he saw her. She didn't see him. That was the thing. She had no idea he was there. He had come down earlier than usual, earlier than she would have expected, and he had stopped on the landing because something in the way she was standing made him stop. She was in the corridor just off the entrance hall, the small corridor that led to what had been, according to the inventory, the morning room, the family sitting room, the room Eleanor had told him was used every day when her mother was alive. Not for guests, not for occasions, just for ordinary life. Breakfast on slow mornings, books in the afternoon, the room where the blue vases had been. Eleanor was standing at the doorframe, not inside the room, just at the threshold, her hand raised, her fingertips resting lightly on the wooden frame, not gripping it, just touching it, the way you touch something you are trying to memorize. She was looking into the room. William stood on the landing and didn't move. He couldn't see her face from where he was, only her profile and her hand, and the particular stillness of someone who thinks they are completely alone and has allowed themselves for just this moment to stop holding everything together. She stood there for a long time. Then she lowered her hand.
She straightened. That familiar motion. Shoulders back, chin level, the composure settling back into place like a coat she had learned to wear in all weathers. And she walked away down the corridor toward the kitchen. William stood on the landing. He didn't move for a full minute after she had gone. He went through the motions of the morning. Doyle came at 10 with paperwork. William signed what needed signing and asked about what needed asking and said the right things in the right order. Mr. Fitch sent a note with revised estimates on 3 of the paintings, higher than expected, which was good news, which William read and set aside. He had a letter from Charlotte, pleasant, brief, looking forward to seeing him Friday. He read it at the study desk and thought about what Eleanor had said about Marcus Aurelius. He wrote it for himself, no audience, just honesty. Had Charlotte ever written anything just for herself? Had he ever asked? He put the letter in the correspondence pile. At noon, he stood at the study window and looked out at the grounds, the overgrown lawns, the dry fountain, the oak tree at the east end of the garden that was old enough that Eleanor's grandmother had probably climbed as a child. The auction house would sell the grounds with the house. Whoever bought it would probably tear the garden up and start again.
He thought about Eleanor's fingertips on the doorframe. The thing was, and he kept coming back to this, kept turning it over the way you turn over something with an edge you haven't found yet. It wasn't grief he had seen. Not exactly. It was something more careful than grief. Grief is what you feel when you lose something. But Eleanor had never really had this. Not fully. Not in the way a person should have a home. She had lived here for 23 years and eaten at the servants' table and worn one dress to every ball and come home through the back door and been listed in her father's will below the horses. And still she was standing at that doorframe saying goodbye, because it was the only home she had ever known, however badly it had treated her.
William turned away from the window. He sat down at the desk. He looked at the auction house estimates, the painting numbers, the total figure at the bottom of Doyle's summary, the number that, combined with the Hargrove merger, would make everything very clean and very profitable and very much according to plan. He looked at it for a long time. Then he turned the paper over. He didn't look at the number again for the rest of the day.
That evening, he sat alone in the study after dinner. Eleanor had eaten quickly and excused herself. She was finishing something, she said. She hoped he didn't mind. He had said, of course not, and meant it. He sat with a glass of port and his notebook open to a blank page, and he thought. Not calculated, not planned, just thought. He thought about his mother, about Charlotte, about a dining room table with both sides empty and a butler who said, "Good morning, sir," every morning and meant nothing by it and received nothing back. He thought about Eleanor in the armchair the first morning, holding her book, watching the gray sky. He thought about her hand on the doorframe. This was not, he understood now, about the numbers anymore. It had stopped being about the numbers somewhere. He couldn't say exactly when. Maybe the first evening, reading the will with the rain on the windows. Maybe the morning room, when she had said his word without bitterness. Maybe the dinner, when she had said yes across the table and not softened it. Maybe the moment she had stood up in the library when he walked in, composed and quiet, and said, "Your Grace," as if she had been waiting and had decided, somewhere in that waiting, not to break. He picked up his pen, opened the notebook to a fresh page, and he wrote, not a letter, not a plan, just 2 words at the top of the page, the way you write something when you are trying to make yourself look at it directly.
The house. He stared at those 2 words for a long time. Then he wrote 2 more words underneath. Don't sell. He looked at what he had written. Outside, the oak tree moved in the wind, the last of the autumn leaves probably. By the end of the week, there would be nothing left on it. William closed the notebook. He sat in the dark study for a long time, and for the first time since he had arrived at Whitmore Hall, he felt something that was not dread, not calculation, not the low background hum of a life running efficiently toward nothing in particular. He felt, very quietly, like himself. He came on Thursday morning, unannounced. William was in the library with Eleanor. They had saved it for last, as agreed, and they had been working through it quietly for about an hour, Eleanor reading out titles and William writing them down, both of them moving carefully around the fact that this was the last room, and after this the inventory would be finished and everything would be decided. It was, strangely, the most peaceful morning of the week. Then Mrs. Hale appeared in the doorway with an expression that meant trouble. "A Lord Hargrove, Your Grace," she said. "He says he wasn't expected." William looked up from his notebook. "No," he said, "he wasn't."
Hargrove was in the entrance hall when William came down. He was a large man, not tall, but wide, the kind of wide that comes from decades of good dinners and the confidence that someone else will always pay for them. He had his hat in one hand and his gloves in the other, and he was looking around the entrance hall with the expression of a man pricing everything he sees. "Cavendish," he smiled broadly. "There you are. I was in the county. Thought I'd stop in, see how things are progressing. Charlotte sends her regards." "Hargrove," William shook his hand. "I wasn't expecting you until Saturday." "Ah, well," Hargrove waved a hand. "You know how it is. Couldn't resist a look at the property." He was already moving, not waiting for an invitation, just moving, the way men like Hargrove moved through spaces they had decided were already theirs. "Solid bones," he said, looking up at the ceiling. "Good proportions. The grounds need work, but that's nothing. What are we looking at, auction-wise? Fitch gave you numbers?" He did, William said. Good man, Fitch. Reliable. Hargrove moved into the drawing room, looked around, nodded approvingly. This all clears by end of week? That was the plan. Good, good. Hargrove picked up one of the figurines from the mantelpiece, turned it over, set it back. The sooner we close this out, the sooner we can move on the Yorkshire thing. I've had 2 other parties sniffing around that deal, Cavendish. I won't pretend otherwise. Time matters. I understand, William said.
And then Eleanor came downstairs. She had heard the voices, probably. She appeared at the top of the staircase and came down quietly, intending, William could see it, to slip past to the kitchen without interrupting. She had her notebook from the library under one arm, and her eyes were down, and she was doing what she always did, making herself easy, making herself small, taking up as little space as possible. She almost made it. "Ah," said Hargrove. Eleanor stopped. Hargrove was looking at her with the particular look of a man who has just noticed something unexpected in an inventory. "And who is this?" he said, not to Eleanor, to William, as if Eleanor were a piece of furniture that had appeared without explanation. "Miss Whitmore," William said, "Lord Whitmore's daughter." "Ah." Hargrove looked at her again, a brief, comprehensive look, top to bottom, the way you assess something for value. "Right, the will business." He turned back to William. "That sorted?" Eleanor was standing very still on the bottom step. William looked at her face. She wasn't looking at Hargrove. She wasn't looking at William. She was looking at a point on the wall just past both of them. That particular place people look when they have decided that the only way through something is to not be present for it. Her hands were at her sides. Her back was straight. William had seen that posture every day this week. He had seen it in his mother's dining room when he was 11 years old. "I'll have someone show you the East Wing," William said to Hargrove. "Mrs. Hale—" "No need, no need." Hargrove was already moving again, back toward the drawing room. "I'll have a look around myself, if you don't mind. Get a proper feel for the place." He glanced back at Eleanor as he went, not unkindly, just indifferently, the way you glance at a coat stand. "Good day, Miss—" He had already forgotten her name. He walked into the drawing room. His voice drifted back. Lovely proportions, yes, this fireplace is excellent, as if he were alone in the house, as if there were no one else in it worth speaking to. William stood in the entrance hall. Eleanor stood on the bottom step. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then Eleanor said, very quietly, "I'll finish the library list upstairs." Her voice was perfectly level. "Eleanor," William said. She looked at him, and there it was, just for a second, just because she was tired, just because it had been a long week, and this had been one thing too many. The composure slipped. Not dramatically, not into tears, just a fracture, hairline thin across the surface of all that careful stillness. She was exhausted. Not from the week, from years of this, from a lifetime of being looked through by men who saw the room she was standing in more clearly than they saw her. She recovered it almost immediately. The composure came back. She straightened. But William had seen it, and something in him, that thread that had been coming loose all week, that coat he had worn for years and felt unraveling, went very quiet and very certain all at once. He thought about his father's voice through a gap in a dining room door. He thought about his mother's hands. He thought about 17 words and horses with names and a woman who had spent a lifetime leaving through the back door. He thought about himself, the man he had been building carefully, efficiently for 34 years, the man who had arrived at this house 3 days ago with a notebook and a timeline and numbers that were almost beautiful. He looked at Eleanor.
Then he looked toward the drawing room where Hargrove's voice was still going. Yes, yes, this will do very well, filling the space that Hargrove filled all spaces, without asking, without noticing, without once considering who else might be in the room. William set his notebook down on the hall table. "Go finish the library," he said to Eleanor, quietly. "I'll handle this." Eleanor looked at him. That careful, searching look, checking as she always checked whether it was real. Then she nodded once and went upstairs. William straightened his coat and walked into the drawing room.
He got rid of Hargrove by noon. It wasn't difficult. Hargrove was a man who responded to certainty. You simply had to be more certain than he was, which William had always been capable of when he needed to be. He walked him through the East Wing, answered his questions about the auction timeline, confirmed the Yorkshire numbers, and had him back in his carriage before the church clock struck 12. Hargrove left, satisfied. William stood on the front steps and watched the carriage go down the drive and felt, very clearly, like a man who has just been shown exactly what he doesn't want to become. He found Eleanor in the library. She had finished the list. It was sitting on the desk, neat, thorough, every book cataloged with its condition and approximate value, written in her clear, precise hand. She was standing at the window when he came in, looking out at the grounds, the oak tree, the overgrown lawns. She turned when she heard the door. "He's gone," William said. "I heard the carriage," she said. He came into the room properly, closed the door behind him. He didn't go to the desk or the fireplace. He just stood in the middle of the room, and for a moment he wasn't entirely sure how to start. He had never been a man who found starting difficult. He spoke in boardrooms, in Parliament, in negotiations where everything was at stake and everyone was watching. Words had always come when he needed them. They were coming slowly now. "My father," he said, "was a very respected man." Eleanor looked at him.
She didn't say anything. She just waited. The way she waited for things, giving them room. He ran the estate well, managed the finances, fulfilled every obligation. Nobody ever said a word against him in public. William looked at the bookshelves. He also spoke to my mother the way you speak to someone whose opinion you have already decided doesn't matter. For 30 years, every day, nothing dramatic, nothing anyone could point to, just quietly, consistently making her smaller. The library was very still. She never argued, he said, never cried, not where anyone could see. She just held herself together, very straight, very composed. He paused. I used to think that was strength when I was young. I thought she was strong because she didn't break. He looked at Eleanor. I understand now that it wasn't strength, it was survival. There's a difference. Eleanor's hands were still at her sides. She was watching him with that expression he had come to know this week, open, careful, real. I came here on Monday with a plan. The estate, the auction, the merger with Hargrove, the engagement to Charlotte, all of it fitted together very neatly. I was good at neat plans. He paused. I have spent my entire adult life building neat plans, and I told myself that was the same as building something worth having. He stopped.
Looked at the window, the oak tree moving slowly outside. I read the will Monday night, he said. The clause about you, and something, I don't know, something wouldn't leave me alone about it. I kept telling myself it was just a legal irregularity, a loose end, something to be handled efficiently. He shook his head slightly. But it wasn't that. Eleanor said quietly, "What was it?" "It was my mother," he said, standing in a doorway, hands in her lap. not arguing, just absorbing it, because that was all she could do. He looked at Eleanor directly. "And you, standing in this library when I walked in, saying, 'I won't make this difficult for you, Your Grace,' as if you had spent your whole life learning to make yourself easy to deal with." Something moved across Eleanor's face. "Because I had," she said, simply. "I know," he said. "I know that now." The fire made a small sound. Outside, a bird crossed the window, quick and dark against the white sky. "I watched you yesterday morning," William said, "in the corridor, the morning room doorframe." He paused. "You didn't know I was there." Eleanor was very still. "I saw you say goodbye to it," he said, "and I thought, she has spent her whole life in this house, and she never really had it. And she is standing there saying goodbye to it anyway, because it is the only thing she has ever had, even badly." He stopped. "And I thought about myself, about the life I've been building, about Charlotte, who was not present at the dinner where her future was decided, about Hargrove, who walked in here this morning and looked through you like you were part of the furniture." He paused. "About the man I was becoming, the man I was already halfway to being." He looked at her. "I am not going to sell this house," he said. Eleanor's breath shifted, just slightly. "I'm ending the engagement," he said, "and the merger, Hargrove can find another partner for Yorkshire. I'll manage the mills independently. It'll take longer, but it's possible." He kept his eyes on hers. "And I'm having the deed to this estate transferred to your name. It should have been yours from the beginning. It was your mother's house before it was your father's debt." Eleanor stared at him. For a long moment, she said nothing. When she spoke, her voice was very quiet. "Why?" she said. Not, "Are you certain?" or "You can't possibly," or any of the careful deflections she might have used. Just, "Why?" He had known this question was coming. He had thought, during the long morning while Hargrove's voice echoed through the drawing room, about what he would say when she asked it. He had thought about something measured, something reasonable, something that could be explained in practical terms. But she had asked him for honesty once, across a dinner table. He owed her that. "Because I looked at what I was building," he said, "and I saw my father's house, and I refuse to be that man." He paused. "And because you stood in this library on Monday morning, in a house that was being taken from you, and you were kind, you were honest, you didn't perform anything." He looked at her. "I have been in rooms full of people my entire life, and almost none of them have been real. You were real from the first moment." The library was quiet. Eleanor looked at him for a long time. He could see it, everything she was turning over, the careful habit of not trusting, the years of learning that kindness from powerful men came with conditions attached, the deep, practiced instinct to wait for the part where it turned into something else. He waited. He let her look. "You're giving up a great deal," she said finally. "Yes," he said. "The merger, the engagement, the clean plan. Yes. For someone you have known for 4 days." He almost smiled. "For someone," he said, "who reads Suetonius and tells the truth and says yes across a dinner table without softening it." He paused. "For the right thing, which I should have been building toward all along and wasn't." Eleanor looked down at her hands, then up at him. And the composure, that careful, years-long composure, didn't break exactly. It did something else. It softened, just slightly, just enough for him to see underneath it the person who had been holding it in place for so long. She was tired. She was so tired. And he could see it, just beginning, just at the edge. She was starting to believe him. "I don't know what to say to you," she said. "You don't have to say anything," he said. "Not right now." She nodded once, looked at the window, the oak tree, the overgrown grounds, the dry fountain in the front courtyard that had been dry for 2 seasons and could, with some attention, run again. "The deed," she said quietly. "You're serious?" "I'll have Doyle begin the paperwork this afternoon." She was quiet for a moment. "And you," she said carefully, "what will you do after?" It was a real question, not polite, real. He thought about the big London house, the long breakfast table, the butler saying, "Good morning, sir," into the same silence every morning. "I don't know yet," he said honestly. "I think that's probably the right place to start." Eleanor looked at him, and for the first time since Monday morning, for the first time since he had walked into this library and found her sitting straight in that armchair, holding herself together with both hands, she smiled. Small, quiet, the kind of smile that has been waiting a long time to happen. "Yes," she said, "just that. Yes."
Doyle arrived at 2 o'clock. William had sent for him that morning, before Hargrove, before the library, before any of it, with a note that said only, "Come at 2, bring everything." Doyle had arrived with his leather case and his careful expression, and William had sat him down in the study and told him what he needed. Doyle had written it all down without comment. This was one of the things William had always valued about Doyle. The man had the professional discretion to understand that his job was to execute decisions, not interrogate them. He wrote and nodded and asked the necessary clarifying questions in a neutral tone, and did not once say, "Are you certain?" or "Have you considered?" or any of the things that would have made William like him considerably less. When William finished, Doyle looked at his notes. "The deed transfer will take a few days to process formally," he said. "I can have the preliminary document drawn up by tomorrow morning. Miss Whitmore would sign, you would countersign, and the formal registration follows within the week." "Tomorrow morning is fine," William said. "The engagement," Doyle paused. "I assume you'll handle that correspondence personally." "I will." "And the Hargrove partnership, the Yorkshire arrangement." "I'll write to him this evening." Doyle nodded slowly, made another note. Then he looked up. "Is there anything else, Your Grace?" William thought about it. "No," he said. "I think that covers it." Doyle closed his case, stood, and then, just for a moment, just briefly, something crossed his face that was not entirely professional, something that might, in a different man, have been called relief. "Very good, Your Grace," he said, and left.
William wrote the letters that afternoon. The one to Charlotte first. He wrote it carefully. She deserved that. He was honest without being cruel. He told her that the engagement was not right, that she deserved someone who had chosen her, really chosen her, and that he was sorry it had taken him this long to understand the difference. He sealed it and set it aside. The one to Hargrove took longer. Not because he wasn't certain, he was entirely certain, more certain than he had been about anything in years. But Hargrove was not a man who received unwelcome news gracefully, and the letter needed to be precise enough that there was no room for negotiation, no gap Hargrove could push back through. He wrote it 4 times. The 4th version was right, firm, final, the kind of language that closed doors without slamming them. He sealed it, looked at both envelopes on the desk. The clean plan, dismantled in 2 letters on a Thursday afternoon in a dead man's study, in a house he had arrived at 4 days ago, intending to sell. He felt, not relief, not exactly, something steadier than relief, something that had the quality of a decision that was right, and knew it was right, and didn't need anything else to confirm it. He put the letters in his coat pocket and went to find Eleanor.
She was in the garden. He hadn't expected that, But Mrs. Hale, when he asked, had pointed toward the back of the house, and he had gone through the kitchen corridor and out the back door, and there she was, standing near the old oak tree at the east end of the grounds, in her coat and gloves, looking up at the branches. Most of the leaves were gone now, just a few left, dark gold against the white October sky. She heard his footsteps on the gravel and turned. He walked across the lawn toward her. The grass was wet. It had rained again briefly while he was writing, and his shoes were damp by the time he reached her. He reached into his coat. The document Doyle had prepared was a preliminary one, a letter of intent, formal and legally sufficient, confirming the transfer of Whitmore Hall and its grounds to Eleanor Ann Whitmore, pending formal registration. It had William's signature at the bottom. It needed hers. He held it out. Eleanor looked at it, then at him. "Read it," he said. She took it, read it slowly, all of it, every line, the way a person reads something they are not entirely sure is real yet. He watched her eyes move across the page, watched her reach the bottom, stop. She read it again. When she looked up, her eyes were bright, not crying. She wasn't going to cry. He had understood that about her by now, but close. That particular brightness that means everything is being held very carefully in place. "This was always yours," William said quietly. "It should never have been anyone else's to give." Eleanor looked at the document. Her hand, he noticed, was not entirely steady. "I don't," she started. Stopped. Started again. "I don't know how to—" "You don't need to," he said. "There's nothing to repay, nothing to perform. You don't have to say the right thing or be grateful in the right way." He paused. "Just sign it if you want to, and it's yours." She looked up at him. That searching look, that careful, practiced, years-long habit of checking whether something was real before she allowed herself to believe it. She checked. She found what she always found when she looked at him. Something real. She reached into her coat pocket, produced a small pencil. She always had one, he had noticed, from the inventory days. She uncapped it. And she signed. Her name at the bottom of the document. Eleanor Ann Whitmore. Clear and steady despite the hand that wasn't entirely steady. Her name on a document that said the house was hers. She handed it back. William folded it carefully and put it in his coat. They stood there for a moment under the oak tree, in the wet garden, in the thin October light. Somewhere across the grounds a bird was making a sound in the hedgerow. The dry fountain was visible from here, stone basin, bare and still. "It needs work," Eleanor said, looking at the grounds. "It does," William agreed. "The fountain, the east lawn, the kitchen garden is completely gone." She said it practically, already thinking, already planning, already the person she was going to be now that she had somewhere to be it. "The oak is sound, though," William said, looking up at the branches. "Yes," Eleanor said, "it always has been." A small silence, not uncomfortable, the kind of silence that has something good in it. And then Eleanor said, quietly, without looking at him, "What you said earlier about not knowing what comes next." She paused. "Does that frighten you?" William thought about it honestly. "No," he said. "I think it might be the first thing in a long time that doesn't." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Then she said, and this time she was looking at him, "You could stay for a few days more while Doyle processes everything." A pause. "There are still things to sort out, practically speaking." Practically speaking, he almost smiled. "There are," he agreed. "And Mrs. Hale makes very good soup." "She does."
Eleanor looked back at the grounds, the oak tree, the stone fountain, the house behind them, solid and old and hers now, with all its history and all its rooms and all its years of being slowly emptied. "All right, then," she said. "All right," he said, and they stood there a while longer, side by side under the bare oak tree, in the quiet of a Thursday afternoon in October, while the last few leaves came down around them. Neither of them said anything else. They didn't need to.
The fountain worked again by spring. It had taken most of the winter. New pipes, new stonework, a man from the village who knew about these things and came 3 times a week for 2 months. Eleanor had overseen all of it herself, in her coat and muddy boots, with a notebook and a pencil and opinions about every decision. William had watched from the study window on the morning it finally ran. She was standing in the front courtyard when the water came up, just standing there, watching it, her hands in her pockets. And then she had smiled. Not at anyone, just at the water, at the fountain, at the simple fact of something working that had been broken for a long time. He had gone back to his papers, but he had been smiling too. That had been 4 years ago. A great many things had happened in 4 years. Doyle had finalized the deed. William had sorted out Yorkshire independently. It had taken longer, as he'd predicted, and the numbers had been less beautiful for a while, but they had steadied. Hargrove had been furious, briefly, and then had found another partner and moved on, as men like Hargrove always did. Charlotte had married a baronet from Wiltshire the following summer. William had heard she was happy. He hoped it was true. He believed it probably was. His mother had come to visit Whitmore Hall in the 2nd year. She had arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, and Eleanor had met her at the door, and within 20 minutes they had been in the library together, talking, and William had passed the doorway an hour later and heard his mother laughing, really laughing, the kind he had not heard from her in years, at something Eleanor had said. He had stood in the corridor for a moment, just listening. Then he had gone to make himself useful somewhere else and left him to it. His mother had stayed for 2 weeks. She came back every few months now. She had her own room, the blue room on the 2nd floor, the one with the window seat, and she brought books, and she and Eleanor argued cheerfully about philosophy and history, and whether Gibbon was brilliant or exhausting, a question on which they held opposite positions with great enthusiasm. William had no opinion on Gibbon. He had, however, started reading Marcus Aurelius. He found it useful. The house had changed. Not dramatically. It was still old, still stone, still ivy on the east wing making its own decisions, but it was different in the way a house becomes different when it is actually lived in, when someone is paying attention to it, caring about it, knowing which floorboard creaked and which window stuck in the rain, and which corner of the kitchen garden got the best afternoon light. Eleanor knew all of it. She had replanted the kitchen garden in the first spring. She had rehung 3 of the paintings that had been stored in the attic, her mother's choices originally, taken down by her father at some point for reasons nobody remembered. She had opened the rooms that had been closed off, one by one, and let the light back into them. The morning room had the blue vases again. William had found them, the ones from the auction house lot, before the sale had been canceled, and had them sent back without mentioning it. He had come downstairs one morning to find Eleanor standing in the morning room doorway, looking at the mantelpiece with an expression he didn't have a word for. She had turned and looked at him. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know," he said. She had looked at him for a long moment. Then she had walked past him into the corridor and said very casually over her shoulder, "Breakfast is ready." And that had been that. That was how things happened between them, mostly. Not in grand moments, in small ones. In the daily accumulation of small ones. A cup of tea left on his desk when he was working late. A book left on her pillow when he had found something she would want to read. A conversation that started at dinner and somehow continued through the whole evening without either of them noticing the time. He had stayed for a few days more that October. The few days had become a few weeks. The few weeks had become this. All of this, the fountain and the kitchen garden and the blue vases and his mother in the library, and 4 years of something that had grown so quietly and so steadily that William could not have told you the exact moment it had become the most important thing in his life. He wasn't sure it had a moment. He thought it had just always been becoming, from the first morning, from the library, from "Your Grace," said in a quiet voice by a woman who had decided not to break.
It was an evening in late October now, 4 years almost to the week. William was in the study, the same study, his study now, or theirs, the line had blurred, going through correspondence. The fire was going. Outside the window, the oak tree was doing what it did every autumn, losing its leaves in that gradual, unbothered way, as if it had done this enough times to know it was fine. The door opened. Eleanor came in. She had a book under one arm and a cup of tea in each hand, and she set one on his desk without asking, and took her usual chair by the fire, the leather one, the one that had been there since before either of them, the one that had held probably 100 years of people sitting by this fire, and she opened her book. William looked at the cup of tea, then at her. She was reading, or beginning to read. Her eyes were on the page, but she was also, he knew, aware of him looking at her, the way you are aware of things you have become comfortable with. She turned a page. "Gibbon?" he asked. "Thucydides," she said, without looking up. "Again? He gets better every time." William looked back at his correspondence. Outside, the oak tree moved in the wind. From somewhere upstairs, the blue room, there was a faint sound that might have been his mother turning a page of her own. The house settled around them, warm and old and working, the way houses do when people have stopped fighting them and simply let them be homes. He looked at Eleanor. She was reading, her feet tucked under her in the chair, her tea going slightly cold the way her tea always went cold, because she always forgot it when she was reading. The firelight doing what firelight does to a face that is completely at ease. She looked up, met his eyes, said nothing, smiled, just slightly, just that small, quiet smile, the one he had first seen under the oak tree on a Thursday afternoon in October, the one that had been waiting a long time to happen. Then she looked back at her book. William looked back at his letters. The fire crackled. The oak tree moved. And in the morning room down the hall, on the mantelpiece, the blue vases stood exactly where they had always belonged. Some things don't begin with a grand moment. They begin with a woman standing in a library, deciding not to break, and a man who finally understood what that cost.
Dear listeners, thank you for staying with us until the very end of this story. Having you here, sharing this journey, truly means a great deal. I hope this story left something with you, wherever you may be. Feel free to share the city you're watching from and what this story made you think or feel. We always enjoy hearing from you. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next story we bring to life.